So for everybody who's already here, we're going to be spending today getting a little sneak preview for tomorrow's Symphony at 7 concert, which is the Brandenburg second concerto. And I feel super lucky that I got to share the stage and soloist duties with these two fine people here. Amira does not want to hear about OSHA. We are here for Brandenburg today. And we are going to be here for Brandenburg today. So unfortunately, Barry Perkins, our principal trumpet player, who is the fourth soloist for Brandenburg, couldn't be here today, but you have the three of us. So I'll be chatting with Dennis and Lelie about all things Baroque, all things Baroque instrumental, Baroque compositional, and we're gonna have a good time. And for those of you who have questions or want to leave comments, there is a Q&A function on your screen where you can leave any questions you have. You can also do so in the chat, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Or you can be like Amira and give us some topical humor. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it.
Is this just basically you and Amira chatting back and forth today?
That's what, yeah, this is how we do it. This is our party. Here we go. Yay. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it yet, that was a recent performance that was on a recent Thursdays at 7, the Bach Double Concerto for Oboe and Violin, featuring Dennis, our amazing concertmaster, and not Lelie, featuring our second oboist, Ted Sugata, who is equally amazing. This is part of a series of Bach performances that the Symphony is releasing. We had one of the keyboard concertos, the double concerto, and it's going to culminate tomorrow night in Bach's second Brandenburg concerto. So that is why we're here today. We're going to get to know some of the soloists for tomorrow and learn a little bit about how Baroque performance practice applies to our various instruments and how we applied it to our performance you're going to see tomorrow. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, but if you weren't here, if you have any questions throughout the afternoon, please feel free. You can type them in the chat. You can also type them in the Q&A box that should be somewhere on your screen, and we'll do our best to get to those. Yeah, so let's get started. So I want to just give everybody a brief rundown about the history of the Brandenburg concertos in general, and this one specifically, because I think it's a pretty interesting story. This set of 6 concertos were written in the early part of the 18th century by Bach. The exact dates aren't exactly known, and there were some different versions of it, but he basically wrote them as an audition piece for the Margrave of Brandenburg, trying to get a job at his court, and he presented them to the Margrave in 1721. However, his job application was not very successful, and he was rejected for, or at least passed over for the job, which to me is pretty surprising given how famous those pieces have become. One of the things that makes these concertos stand out is they were really innovative for their time in terms of orchestration. Nobody had done anything quite this diverse in terms of orchestration as these 6 concertos. Each one is different in terms of which solo instruments it calls for. For example, the 4th concerto is 2 flutes and violin, which I can't imagine had happened before. This one is particularly interesting in that it calls for violin, oboe, flute or recorder, and trumpet. And from everything I could tell, even though each concerto has a completely different orchestration and group of soloists, the total number of musicians and categories of musicians that it adds up to were the exact group of musicians he had at his position in Curtin at the time. So he was obviously writing for musicians that he knew and with the resources he had at hand. And this particular piece, the second Brandenburg concerto, I find really interesting. I think it's most well known as a trumpet feature and sort of an acrobatic trumpet. I don't know whether you'd call it a dream or a nightmare, but it's a very, very involved and demanding trumpet part, which we are so lucky to have Barry Perkins in the orchestra, who just tackled it amazingly well. But despite it being such an important piece for trumpet players, one of the things that really strikes me as special about it is that all 4 of the soloists really share this sort of soloistic duty, and it's really this sort of kaleidoscope of colors that goes throughout the piece, and we're trading off themes and playing back and forth with each other, and it's all these different combinations of the 4 of us playing amongst ourselves and then the soloist versus or with the orchestra. The concerto is sort of typical in that it's in a slow, fast, slow form. Slow, fast, fast movement, slow movement, fast movement. And the trumpet is only involved in the first and last movements, which I assumed was to give the poor trumpet player a break. It's an extremely demanding high trumpet part. But what I discovered when I researched this a little bit was that there was actually a more practical reason even than that for why there's no trumpet in the slow movement, which is that the valveless trumpets of the day could only play in specific major keys. They couldn't play in minor keys. And often Bach wanted to write his sort of middle movement as a more intimate, slow movement in a minor key, and the trumpet just couldn't do that. So for that reason, there's no trumpet in the slow movement. But it's just an amazing piece, and we're very excited for you all to see it tomorrow night. So I'd like to now invite Lelie and Dennis into the conversation. I'm just curious, have either of you guys performed this piece before elsewhere?
This is actually my first time, and in this this first time being in this situation is kind of bittersweet, because I really wish we could be closer together without plexiglass and in a more intimate setting. But it was great that we had a chance to do it, and I'm hoping that after the pandemic that we get a chance to do it again with more ideal situation, being closer together in the front of the orchestra. It was a challenge, but I think it was worth it, and hopefully the final product comes out well.
Yeah. I've done it two other times. Once at Curtis, where I happened to be with Dennis, but we didn't get to play it together then. And then one other time at a church in Pasadena. So, and it's such a beautiful piece. So I always love playing this piece, definitely.
Yeah, I have to say this is also, I'm like Dennis, this is my first time getting to perform it. I've performed the other ones that involve flute, but I obviously was sort of familiar with this piece, but not in terms of playing it. And it was just so much fun, despite the distance and the plexiglass and all the COVID safety measures. And like I was saying before, I just feel like it's so much fun, like figuring out where, like I have something with Lelie that sort of fits together in this really perfect way, and then shifts immediately to maybe Lelie and Dennis doing something. And then you just, there's always something different in this really sort of, it's like opening the back of a Swiss clock. It's just all beautifully put together and so much fun to get to hear from the middle of it. I'm just curious, you know, as I was mentioning when I was introducing the piece, it's sort of a weird orchestration. Like I wouldn't myself come up with that group of 4 instruments out of the top of my head. I'm just curious, do you guys have any thoughts on why that combination seems to work so well together?
I mean, he must have hated his trumpet player, because I mean, to write something like that, I mean, and you've heard this with the Baroque trumpet. I mean, it's all over the map. I have never heard a good recording of it. It's I mean, because I mean they're as you can imagine, it's all done, I think, with their mouth, and there's no keys. So and I know a lot of orchestral trumpet players who would never take this responsibility. I mean, because I don't think it's in their contract to play this. This is a lot of places. A Baroque trumpet player would be hired for this, even if it was other members of the orchestra. So, yeah, Barry doing it, and it's incredible because he can do that, and it seems like this is something that he does all the time. But I know that this is not something he does all the time. You know, he's playing maybe Bach, but not this kind of ridiculous high stuff. But you know, he's a symphony trumpet player. I mean, he plays Strauss and Mahler. So it was amazing that he could do it. I mean, I was a little worried for him, actually. I was like, are you sure you want to do this? But it sounded amazing.
Yeah. And we had a question from Amir about whether he's using a Baroque trumpet. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he's actually using a modern piccolo trumpet.
I think so.
Absolutely.
So it's a modern trumpet with valves, keys, whatever they're called. But a sort of miniature version of that. So I still wouldn't want to be responsible for doing that.
No, I mean, if you want to go online and check out a Baroque recording of this with a trumpet player without valves, you'll tell. I mean, again, they're at the highest level because it's on YouTube and, you know, it's published, but it's really not at anything like Barry played, and it's much less accurate. So we're thank God for modern instruments, and thank God for Barry.
Yeah. So I'm curious, with this piece, are there any particular challenges apart from the trumpet for each of your instruments? Are there any particular challenges that this piece presents for violin or oboe?
I think trying to match a trumpet on the oboe. So the oboe part, it's beautiful. I have especially my favorite is the second movement with you two, and just sort of weaving in and out the beautiful melodies. But then, especially in the third movement, I feel like the oboe is sort of used more like the trumpet, sort of like, you know, just almost like trumpet and oboe duets. That's how it starts. And so I think the challenge is sort of trying to match articulation and his, you know, Barry's beautiful stylistic Baroque playing. So that's one of the challenges, definitely.
I think I mean, I guess it's a plus and minus, but now with COVID and, you know, with microphones, we can adjust. But I can imagine in a normal situation, this would be so difficult to deal with balance.
Yes.
Because you have an oboe and a trumpet, of course, and a flute. Not that the flute is soft, but compared to the trumpet. So, and then as a violinist, you know, when you come out and then when you're a supporting role, these are all kind of things that you need to think about. And hopefully, the engineers downstairs who are really the all stars of this COVID period, hopefully they'll make it sound good. But yeah, it was frustrating, actually, you know, because we can't tell anything about balance. And Carl kept on saying, just play more and they'll adjust it downstairs. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I hope we can get a chance to do this again when COVID is over, with
Yeah.
with our regular audience and all that stuff.
Absolutely. And do either of you have a favorite part of the piece, either movement or a specific part of a movement that our audiences could listen out for tomorrow?
Second.
No, I agree. I mean, because the second one was so intimate,
Yes.
and actually Carl didn't conduct, and it was just the three of us, and then with a continuo and a solo cello, and it was, yeah, I mean, I think that this is really the heart of the of the piece, and everyone recognized the last movement, but for me, like Lelie, I think this is a very special slow movement, and it's very very tender, and it gives a chance for all three instruments to really play together, and then be a soloist for a little bit, but then to blend. No,
Yeah.
so for me, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and just sort of
Yeah.
like harmonically like answer each other. Like, Ben, you'd have a phrase and then I'd have one, and just sort of like it's like a question and an answer, and it's a little argument, but then I'm right because I'm louder at the end. So it's just, as I'm usually right, but anyway, it's just a beautiful conversation with all of us. So I love the second movement. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I think that also the fact that the trumpet is such a prominent role in the first and third movements, it makes it this sort of extroverted, it's much more declamatory in the outer movements. And then it sort of makes that shift to this intimate small group playing in the second movement, like seem even more serene and lyrical and sort of draw the audience in. So I think it's just beautifully constructed in that way.
I'm gonna ask a stupid question, Ben. Can you play recorder?
No one will want to hear that.
So you're not equally good on the recorder.
No.
You should hear his penny whistle, though. I'm not kidding.
So yeah, as an aside, so we have a question from Amir about, have there been adjustments made to our Thursday night recorded concerts because of the issues relating to spacing and barriers and things?
I'm sure.
And yes, so as Dennis mentioned earlier, one of the real tricky things about being together indoors as an orchestra is those disgusting wind players, because you can't wear a mask and play a wind instrument, and it's sort of, the heart of the problem of COVID time is breathing on each other. So the symphony has come up with creative ways to make it work by having plexiglass sort of cubes all around the wind players. We're tested very frequently, and there's a lot of distance in between us, which is great for health, very difficult for ensemble, because you start hearing things at a delay and things get slow. And so it takes a lot of concentration and some, magic of technology sometimes to help us have headsets to hear.
No, like you said, I mean, right now, our whole lives we're taught to listen and to be close. And right now it's the opposite. We can't listen, we have to watch, and we can't be close. And so it's everything that we're taught not to do when we're younger. But until this is over, this is what we have to do. And I mean, the whole crew, all the cameramen, all the sound people, they're doing an amazing job, because some of them, they did not sign up for this, for sure. So really, they're doing an amazing job, and we need them to continue doing that until we get back on stage with the audience, and no plexiglass and no distancing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll feel very nice once that is all gone and we can get back to life as usual.
Yeah.
So Lelie, I want to talk to you for a little bit about your instrument in particular, and then sort of how the Baroque oboe that Bach wrote for evolved into the instrument that you and other oboists play today. So why don't we start? Can you just share with us about your instrument?
Sure, let me get it. So this is a modern Lelie oboe. It's made out of grenadilla wood and silver keys, and a couple things that make the oboe very, very special. The bore inside, so the hollow part, is conical, so it's sort of cone shaped, and that it didn't used to be. Like the Baroque oboes in the past were not conical and sort of had a harder time getting higher notes out. So they engineered the bore to sort of go up at the top and get more narrow at the top, so it would help the higher register come out easier. And then the other very special, horrible thing about the oboe is that we play a double reed, which is the most challenging part of the oboe. Nobody told me about this before I picked it up in band. So yeah, so it's definitely. I mean, my husband Josh plays a single reed and just sort of picks one out of the box and slaps it on. Oh, I've got a good one. And meanwhile, like 2 hours go by, I'm whittling and scraping. I'm like, I think it's gonna be good. Oh, chipped it on my tooth. It's gone. 2 hours, out of my life. So anyway, the reeds are really a pain in the butt, but once you have a good one, you always strive to make another good one because it's you have a good one and you're like, oh my gosh, I can do anything. I sound good. I can play low notes, high notes, everything. So the reed really is about, I would say, 95% of the instrument. So it's your tone, articulation, your dynamic range. Everything is affected by this little itty piece of wood, cane. That's it.
Do you happen to know how oboe reeds would have been different back in Bach's time? Like, in what ways they would have been different
Yes.
from what you make today?
Yeah. So the Baroque oboe reeds were definitely a lot shorter, um, and probably just much thinner scrape. Like, so I've tried. I had one like just complete fail attempt at trying to play a Baroque oboe, and the reed was so light. It's like paper thin, and I'm used to blowing, this instrument and reeds, and it's much more resistant. And then I went to play the Baroque oboe and I completely overblew it and it's just like squawked like I stepped on something. So it was terrible. So it's a very much lighter, very, very fluid, almost more like a flute almost. So it takes very little air, and just I think it's very flexible. Also flexible in pitch and flexible in sound. So lighter, brighter sound, I would say. Yeah.
Interesting. For some reason, I thought the reeds would have been thicker, not thinner, but that's very
No, they're definitely much thinner. It's like, put it out the window in the driving car and it'll make a sound.
interesting.
So,
Wow. And I was doing a little bit of research about this beforehand and found out that the oboe developed from the shawm. I guess I had known that, but it was in Paris in the late 17th century, and I thought that was really interesting given the story about your particular oboe and where it's made and who
oh
made
yes.
it. So can you
Paris,
tell us a
yep.
little bit about that, about this
Yes.
your
Well,
maker?
Larray, so this is a Larray oboe and it's probably the most popular. I mean, there's many different beautiful instrument makers out there, who make beautiful oboes, but I would say Larray is sort of the historical gold standard of oboe producers, and I've had the great honor to go to the Larray oboe factory in Paris, like I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and they are just so amazing, and just the history. So I would say they probably really changed this around turn of the century, and they also developed so many new keys and mechanisms that work much better than they used to, and they changed things in the board. So they have done probably the most research about the turning the this modern day oboe into what it can do, and the key structure and everything. So yeah.
It's amazing. And one of the things, especially as a woodwind player, that I'm very happy not to have to deal with is having an actual wooden instrument and all of
Yes.
the things that entails. So
Yes.
I'm curious, like, what sort of special considerations do you have to make with an oboe that's made of a natural material like wood? Like, do you have to be careful with things like temperature and humidity?
Completely, yes. Like the basically all of us here in LA and Southern California, if we hear the dreaded Santa Ana winds report on the weather, it's like, oh no, because I've had numerous oboes crack, when it's so dry and windy and hot, and and the humidity level changes so rapidly, and it just, causes the wood to shrink and crack. And I don't know, Dennis, if your violin has similar problems, but it's the other thing is like the Santa Ana winds and the dryness, like they completely shut down your reeds. So like we just, reeds feel horrible, and the oboe feels horrible, and you have to just worry about your reed drying out constantly and the oboe cracking in the dry air. So yeah, hot and dry is the worst, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Dennis who wants to know, he says, you mentioned scraping, shaping your reeds. He wants to know why you can't be like a clarinetist and just go get a bunch of reeds and try one until you get it right.
Well, mainly because all of our sound concept is really developed through the reed. And so I can sometimes, maybe buy partly finished reed and then finish it on my own. But it's also much more expensive. I mean, if I bought one professional oboe reed, it's about $40. And, that's one reed. It'll maybe last like 2 concerts or something like that. So for me, and all professional oboists, like we're always just having reeds in different stages, scraping along. This one's almost done, that one's almost dead. And, just sort of switching reeds out. Our mouths are very individual. So somebody else's reed might be too resistant or too easy for me and not give me the sound that I want. So it's very, personal, basically. Yeah.
I think you should train your kids how to make reeds.
I would love to.
I've been telling her that for years.
Yeah.
Well, Ben tried to make a reed once.
I destroyed her equipment instead by accident.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I've never seen Lelie get so angry. So, Lelie, I'm wondering, would you mind giving us just a little demonstration of sort of your setup and what it sounds like?
Sure. Okay, so here's my little reed, double reed. Okay, so I'll play a little of my favorite movement. Oh, that's oboe.
It's just so beautiful, and you have such a beautiful sound. It's so gorgeous, and I think Bach would have been just bowled over.
Very sweet. So do you, both of you.
Well, thank you so much, Lelie.
Welcome.
It's great to get to hear some of your thoughts about the piece, and I know I'm very excited to see the end result with your performance tomorrow.
Yours too, definitely.
Thank you. So Dennis, I'd love to chat with you a little bit. One of the things, we had a question about this actually, and I was wondering similarly, I noticed when we were recording the Brandenburg that you were using a different bow than normal. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
Indeed. So with the double concerto and the Brandenburg, I used the Baroque bow, and in an ideal situation, all the strings would have used a Baroque bow. But for me, I thought, well, I have one anyway, so I'm just going to use it. And Carl thought it was okay. It just gives you a little bit more control, and it produces a different kind of sound that's more ideal for Baroque music. And and the Baroque bow I have is fantastic. So that's what I was using. It's obviously shaped very differently than a modern bow. It's much lighter. It's actually not made of Pernambuco. It's made out of snake wood. Whenever I do Baroque stuff, I try to use this bow. I haven't officially been trained or taught how to use it, but I kind of did it on my own. I've taken a few classes here or there, but I know that I'm not in any way a Baroque specialist or know what I'm doing with the Baroque bow like those Baroque specialists, but I try my best, and I think the secret is having just the best Baroque bow. That's half the battle.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it's made of a different type of wood. Do you know why, like what the purpose of the different woods would be?
I think it's a little less dense. I think it's a little lighter, all those things. Pernambuco, I think, is a little bit more dense wood and great for modern bows and playing Tchaikovsky. But I think that Baroque bows are usually made of different kinds of woods. It's not only snake wood, but all different kinds of woods. I wish I knew all the different woods that are used for Baroque, but I know that not too many Pernambuco Baroque bows out there.
So Amira wants to know, would you also need a Baroque violin, or is it more typical to play? Because I mean, I want to talk about your violin actually in a minute, but can you tell us about why the bow would be the more important thing to?
Yeah, for me, I mean, again, if we're gonna go full out Baroque and everyone is gonna do it, then we tune down our instruments and we use gut strings, and I take the chin rest off. But so I kind of play with a modern violin but use a Baroque bow. Yeah, because obviously we're not a Baroque orchestra and we're not specializing in Baroque music. But I think that this time we had to play Bach, I think, was great for the orchestra. To listen and to kind of play in a different style, less vibrato, a little bit less pressure with the bow, things that you don't usually get a chance to experiment with during a regular season where you're playing a lot of Brahms and Tchaikovsky and Strauss and heavy romantic music. So in that way, it's been nice playing new repertoire. But yeah, I certainly did not play on a Baroque violin.
Yeah. But speaking of your violin, though, when you were my guest many moons ago, almost a year ago at this point, we talked about your violin, and from everything I understand, well, first of all, do you know what year your violin was made?
Oh, certainly. My violin is 1701 Dushkin Stradivarius. So this violin would have been made during the time of Bach and playing these things. So when we think of Stradivarius right now, it's like, this violin was designed to play a Stravinsky concerto and Shostakovich, but absolutely not. I mean, this is designed to play Bach, and so it's amazing. Of course, the setup was a little different. The bridge was a little bit lower. The post was not as tight. They were using gut strings, so there were differences. But this violin in 1701 was playing Bach, and I'm sure that I mean, these are the instruments that Bach was used to hearing for sure.
Yeah, when you mentioned that the setup is different, and so you mentioned the bridge and the strings. Am I wrong in thinking that sometimes the necks also had to be?
Yep, slightly altered. The angle of the neck a little bit, the length of the neck. So I mean, I wish I knew all the specifics of what goes into making a Baroque violin, but there are subtle differences here and there. But the biggest would be the strings, because we're now using metal strings and steel, where before it was all gut and it was a different kind of color. I mean, and then the bow makes a big difference also, of course.
Right. And when you say gut strings, can you explain to the layperson, like, what would you normally use for modern repertoire and what are gut strings?
I think originally gut strings were made out of catgut, to be honest. And there are still gut strings out there right now. But the problem with gut strings are they go out of tune very quickly and they don't last very long and they're very expensive. So now we use combination synthetic metal, steel. There's so many different things now we use. Some synthetic gut, actually, trying to imitate gut string sound, but certainly not made out of gut. But like I said, I mean, if I had a set of gut strings on for my fiddle, I would have to tune after every 5 minutes, and that would cause havoc with intonation. And it's also very temperamental to temperature and humidity and everything. So that's why I think we've now gone toward the steel and metal. But I know certainly some players who love the gut sound, and when they play Bach and when they're playing solo, they'll put on some gut strings and play. And yes, cats all over the world are very thankful for synthetic. Thank you, Rosalind. That's totally true. Cats were not big fans of the gut string, even in Baroque times.
Well, and when you talk about the shift from gut strings to steel strings, I'm curious also because, part of the history of the evolution of the flute and going from a wooden instrument to a metal instrument, and a lot of the innovations that were made were about allowing the instrument to have more volume and sort of project in bigger and bigger halls and bigger orchestras. And I'm curious, is that also tied up in the shift from, like, would a steel stringed instrument be noticeably louder and more projected than a gut string?
Certainly. I mean, projection is one thing, and durability, I think, is the other thing. Like I said, I mean, a good string right now could last 3-4 months for a professional player. for students, a little bit longer. And for really old professionals, they last until it breaks. So that could be up to 5 years. But all kidding aside, I think a gut string doesn't last that long. And like I said, it goes out of tune so quickly. So that's the biggest issue. But certainly volume is a part of it. And in my opinion, just the durability, how long it lasts.
Yeah, interesting. And then, talking about your violin being literally older than the Brandenburg concerto that we're performing, or at least as old, depending on the exact dates of when the piece was written. I'm just curious, do you feel a weight of history when you pick up that instrument to play music from the time when it was written, knowing that your instrument has basically seen everything from then to now? That must be
it's amazing, because I've had the violin for now 14 years, and even in my 14 years, I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, I've lived in on the East Coast of the US, and now in California. So even in 14 years, it's traveled so much and performed all over the world. I can only imagine between 1701 and till the time I got it, what it's gone through, what it's seen, the composers that it's met, the concert halls it's played in. So no, it's amazing. And every day I open my fiddle, I understand the magnitude, and I'm grateful, first of all, of course, that I have a chance to play something like this. And also I understand that I am playing a piece of history every time I play the violin.
Yeah, I mean, seriously incredible. I mean, if I were to say what's an old flute, I would say, the 1940s.
Right.
Very, very different.
Right. But I mean, that being said, I don't know about flute, but do flutes appreciate in value over time?
That's a good question. I mean, it's almost too soon to tell, because the flutes, the modern flute was only made a little over 100-something years ago.
I see.
But I'd say they at least retain their value. It depends.
Right.
But nothing at this point like what we're talking about with a Stradivarius violin or a viol.
Right. Yeah, because Strads, even in the 1960s, you could buy it for, I don't know, $60,000, and now good Strads are going for $15-20 million. So it's an insane amount of money, and so most musicians can't afford it. They need donors like me. I mean, this is not my violin. Someone bought it and lets me use it, so I'm very grateful, and hopefully that person stays healthy and continues to be my friend, so I can keep on playing it.
So we have a question from Dennis, who wants to know, he says, from a non-musician, do your strings ever break during a performance? And then what do you do?
Absolutely. So one famous incident I had was when I was playing in the proms. We were playing Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, and about 2 pages left and my E string pops. So basically I take my stand partner's violin, and then my violin gets pushed all the way to the back, and basically the last stand plays the whole last 2 pages without an E string. And actually you can see this, and it's very funny, because the girl who I was just a guest with the Guitar Philharmonic, so they didn't know me. So this girl who had to use my violin for the last 2 pages was obviously upset because she couldn't play half the notes. And then later someone told her it was a Strad, and she was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it's a Strad." So, and this has happened to me quite a few times. In Germany, actually, they have a violin on stage that's fully strung up and ready to go, just in case that happens, so that somebody doesn't have to end the concert with one less E string. But usually the E string breaks, and since you can't change it on stage, I'll usually take my stand partners, and the violin will just head back. So, and this has happened to me a few times, and I've seen concerts where it's happened also.
Wow, I am not envious. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for answering these questions about the violin and about tomorrow's Brandenburg. Are there any particular things you want people to look out for when they're watching tomorrow?
No, I mean, let's talk about you and your flute and how that's developed. I mean, because I was joking that you played recorder, but when did people start playing this on the flute, the Brandenburg?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because there was a lot of sort of gray area between what is now known as the transverse flute, or the one that's held crossways, versus the recorder that would be held up and down, more like a clarinet or an oboe. And the other big difference, back when Bach was alive, I think more than, well, maybe equal to oboe and a lot more different than maybe the violins were from the modern counterparts. Flutes of Bach's day were made of wood. and if they had any keys at all, they had maybe one. And so playing things like chromatic lines and in different keys was actually very difficult, because the modern flute, when I press down one key, it presses down other corresponding keys throughout the instrument that allow me to play easily and comfortably in various keys.
So basically, you're cheating.
Oh, absolutely. I live my life to cheat on the flute and make my life. So they were made of wood, and they were basically continued to be made out of wood, and gradually got more and more keys to make flutists' lives easier, until the mid-19th century, when a man named Theobald Böhm created what's known as like the sort of modern flute mechanism, the system of keys that we have now. And that has been replicated on instruments like the clarinet and the oboe. But he was most known for his work on the flute. And they also, like I was saying, when we were talking about violins moving from gut to steel, flutes went from wood to metal. And that was another innovation that was made in the 19th century to compensate for larger orchestrations and larger halls and wanting to fill up the space. It also allows them to play more in tune and not go wonky, like Lelie was saying, with things like Santa Ana Winds. And I was really excited for the Brandenburg that we recorded a few years ago. I had the honor of going up to Asheville, North Carolina. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. And it turns out the preeminent wooden flute maker in the world lives in Asheville, North Carolina, about 2 hours from where I grew up. And
Wow.
he makes flutes for, people in all the most famous European orchestras, American orchestras. And there's been sort of a trend in the last few years moving back towards wooden instruments. And there are innovations in how we age the wood and how they shape the wood that can make them stand up in a modern orchestra and be loud enough and consistent enough. So a few years ago, I made the trip up to Asheville with my dad, and had this wooden head joint made, which is made of African blackwood, which has to be aged for at least a decade. They get it very, very dense. And the head joint is really what's most responsible for producing the tone quality of a flute. And so it was sort of a compromise. I couldn't afford the full wooden flute, and I didn't really have a reason to get one, but I wanted to be able to get that sound for things like Beethoven symphonies, Bach Brandenburg concertos, even things like Brahms symphonies, Mahler symphonies, when there would have been, they were probably written with a wooden flute sound in mind. And it tends to be a much warmer sound. There's a lot more resistance because there's a lot more material there. So you can get a much more sort of smooth, fluid line because you have actual material to push your air against to keep the pressure and intensity in the musical line. And I've actually commissioned the rest of the flute to be made for this one. So that one should be arriving by next season. So I'm very excited for that.
Awesome.
And I went ahead and took the liberty of making a couple clips that I think we're going to share now, just to demonstrate a little bit of the difference between the colors of playing on a wooden instrument versus a metal instrument. So what we're going to share with you now is a piece by C.P.E. Bach, who was one of Bach's children. And he was probably the most famous of Bach's children in terms of carrying on his legacy as a composer. And C.P.E. Bach wrote a sonata for solo flute in A minor that was sort of a response to his dad's partita for solo flute in A minor. So I've recorded two versions of this movement. The first one is on my gold flute that I play most regularly in the orchestra. And then I'll go back and play it on the wooden head joint so everybody can just sort of get a sense for what this sounds like. So thank you all for allowing me to geek out for a little bit about flutes. It tends to be sort of a subtle difference, as I don't know if everybody could see it, but Amira had pointed out that she thought it sounded a little smoother, a bit more mellow. I think that's absolutely right. It tends to be a sort of glowier sound, and something that also tends to bloom in the hall. And so I think on the recording tomorrow, you might be able to hear even more what the sort of wooden timbres sound like, as opposed to what you might hear with a more steely, strong metal flute sound. And so I'm very excited for you all to hear it tomorrow. I want to thank all of you guys for coming and sharing this afternoon with us. I think it's been fun for me to get to dive into tomorrow's piece, the Brandenburg Second Concerto, a little bit before we get to premiere it. And I've gotten to hear a little bit of a preview of it. And I think that it is going to be really a big treat for all of us. And like Dennis said, I think it's going to be really great once we're actually able to take down the plexiglass, have a full live audience, and have everybody come to the hall and hopefully play it again. Yeah, and sorry, Amira just wrote in about once I have the all wood flute, will I use it for Baroque or what? And I plan to use it for as many things as possible. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see once the rest of the instrument is here. The maker in Asheville is starting to work on it next month in May. So I will keep everybody updated, and maybe that would be a fun mixer for the future, see the flute in progress. So thank you guys so much for coming. I want to thank Dennis and Lelie for joining me today. And even though Barry wasn't here tonight, I want to thank him for his amazing performance that we're going to share with you tomorrow. And to sort of cue us out, we've got a little clip for tomorrow as a bit of a preview. So thank you all. I'll see you tomorrow on YouTube. Hopefully we can chat in the YouTube chat, and I will see you next week. We have the amazing founders of the Celestina Music Society, Maya Jasper White and Kevin Kumar, who are going to be my guests at next week's mixer, and we're going to talk about all things chamber music. So I will see you then.